It's the scramble for Africa all over again. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is in South Africa. We're told the trip is to deepen political and economic ties with the United States. On the agenda is the just transition, as South Africa has been promised over 146 billion rand, mostly in loans, to achieve this. Yellen is on a three-country tour of Africa, stopping in Senegal, Zambia and now South Africa. To discuss this, I'm joined by Professor Chris Isike from the University of Pretoria. He's a professor of African politics as well as international relations. Professor, good morning and thank you very much for your time. So just on the back of a visit by Russia's foreign minister, now US's Treasury Secretary is in the country, and we understand, as we stated there in the intro, that the just transition will top that agenda. Now some are saying there's something bigger we should be reading into this, particularly the timing of it all. Your views on this trip and its significance?
Well, good day and thank you for having me on your show. I agree that the timing can make one question, other motives besides just a follow-up of the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in which we had in December. So she's gone around a couple of countries in Africa. She's gone to Senegal, she went to Zambia, and then, stopped in South Africa yesterday. Like you said, to discuss, just energy transition, environmental protection through wildlife conservation, and also fighting corruption was on the agenda. But like you also said, look, this is part of a bigger picture of renewed superpower rivalry in Africa, and Africa becoming, like we were during the Cold War, a bride that is attractive to a lot of superpower suitors. The question for us would be whether we are ready to leverage the opportunities that this kind of rivalry presents us.
Now, when we speak of readiness, I just want to talk about the just transition here, particularly when it comes to the whole debate around loans versus grants. We understand that we'll need for the next 10 years around 98 billion to just somehow transition into cleaner energy. But we've gotten, or at least an investment of 8.5 billion, which obviously falls short. Where do you stand on this whole conversation around perhaps not giving the continent loans, but rather grants instead?
So those loans, the $8.5 billion you're talking about, which you have pledged, are actually in loans, not grants.
Yes.
And we have an immediate energy crisis that we need to deal with. And the South African government has reiterated that it will continue to use its coal reserves to ensure that it's able to battle the energy crisis it has. And the two can exist together. The US talks about green energy transition. They want to support that. It doesn't mean that we must necessarily abandon our immediate coal deposits and what that can do to solve our immediate problems. So in my view, it's useful to consider, the energy transition, but at the same time with an eye for solving our immediate problems. And if the rich countries of the world, the G20, for example, are not willing to support Africa by giving it grants instead of loans, then we must use our resources to achieve our objective. It's in our national interest to do so. Besides, a lot of these countries have actually developed their economies using the same coal, and then it will be a bit disingenuous for them to tell us to abandon those for now, while they are not doing anything to help us, achieve these objectives without major cost to us.
And then I want to take you back to Mr. Lavrov's visit. Minister Pandor doubled down on their call for peace, which they believe can only be attained through diplomacy and negotiation, not condemnation of any nation. Now, that particular position, some say, will strain diplomatic relations with the West. We have the U.S. today in the country. Do you really believe that it would strain relations, or we have to be independent and take a position as a country, or we have that right to be independent and take our own position?
Yeah, we have the right to be independent and take our own position, and the United States is beginning to respect that agency, that right that we have. So we are free to relate and engage with whoever we choose, so long as we understand what we are getting into, our interests are protected. There is a competition. I don't think that is going to strain any relationship, because the U.S. has interest, heavy interest in South Africa, for example, beyond the political and the economic. There are also cultural bilateral ties between South Africa and the United States. So these are deep ties that will not just be, be jeopardized by South Africa looking to, assert itself in terms of multilateralism, which is a principled position of foreign policy of the country.
But there's been strong opposition even locally in the country. Internally, there have been those that have been opposed and still believe that our position on the Russia-Ukraine war is honestly one that will somehow compromise our country.
Well, the assumption that we are supposed to not be able to have any kind of agency and that we must pander to the interests and whims of superpowers is beginning to change. We do have agency. Some of these countries actually need us more than we do need them, especially when we're able to get our acts together as states and governments in the continent. So superpowers are recognizing that they don't have what it takes to police the entire world. They need allies, and these allies also their interests have to be respected. It has to be a discussion, where everyone is brought to the table. And the United States policy towards Africa now has started recognizing Africa as equal partners, and that should translate into listening to the views and interests of Africa and then meeting them halfway.
So you're saying this is our opportunity to capitalize on some of these opportunities and come in as equals. But there's always been the criticism that with lower GDPs, we certainly do not go into the negotiating table as equals.
Yes, that's correct. But we do have our strengths, and I think that we can leverage on those strengths. Again, I said that would depend on how we are able to answer certain questions that have to do with, the state in Africa, whether the state is still fit for purpose, and resolve our governance, challenges. And then also there needs to be a lot of cooperation, development of common African positions within the continent, so that we would approach these superpowers united. Otherwise, they will cherry pick us as individual states, and the question of the low GDP, comparative low GDP you mentioned, then becomes a critical factor in these kinds of engagements.
Now, the country is also hosting the BRICS summit a bit later on this year. What do you think should top the agenda? Well,
I do know that there are calls for expanding the membership of BRICS. So that would be something that South Africa would look at. South Africa can also look at, getting support from China and Russia, to assist with its energy crisis, and to also call for more investments. So these are things that South Africa is looking to do, but also to exert itself as a multilateral actor. Rooted in its foreign policy, that is also rooted in Ubuntu, which is reimagining a world where, that is more inclusive and human-centric than we currently have.
Do you think the Russia-Ukraine conflict will also feature prominently, with perhaps Russia looking to sway most of the partners in its favor?
Well, we can't rule that out because it affects the economy of the BRICS itself. So maybe something they would look at, but I don't think that it would be top of the agenda. It could be around discussions between President Putin and President Ramaphosa, for example, and individual presidents like President of India trying to weigh in here and there, but that will not be the main official agenda of the BRICS Summit, because this BRICS Summit is a yearly summit that the BRICS has, and it's the issue of economy and its economic integration, development, financing, cooperation are things that usually top the agendas. But this crisis, of course, affects all of those, and I'm sure that it will be something they'll talk about or do informally.